Hello and welcome to Revolver's Fan First podcast, where we speak to artists about their lifelong history as a fan, because funnily enough, all artists were fans first. Today we have the mighty Devin Townsend, and I will continue to refer to you as mighty over a number of times. See, it's true.
I'll take it. Thank you. Good to see you again, Christina.
Yeah, it's always good.
I'm coming out of a period of activity that has been overwhelming, but you know, we're making it through. So I think that the next few months are still going to be challenging, but by the end of this period, I will have accomplished a lot of things that I've been aiming to do for many years. And it's just funny how I've never had the opportunity to have the time to do these things, right? And I've just, I mean, it's been pretty productive. But my objectives have always been to try and actualize these creative ideas that I have. Like I'll have an idea and I'm like, oh, I want to do that. And as opposed to just having it as an idea and then leaving it, I like to actualize it. And so there's been a whole bunch of them that have been on the back burner that I've taken this opportunity to do, which has, as is tradition, I've bitten off more than I can chew, but I've managed to swallow a bit this week. So I've got room for more.
That's good. We're gonna dive deep into this. I'm just saying we're going to dive deep into this in a moment. But first of all, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'd like to talk about all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
What we will get into all of the stuff you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first moment you realized you were an unusual kid?
Was I?
Yeah. No.
All right. Yeah, no, I was for sure. No, man. Oh yeah.
I don't buy that you weren't. I was a weird.
You know what?
Imaginary friends.
You know what? I was a strange. I guess I was a weird kid, but I wasn't too concerned about being weird. You know what I mean? So it was like that was a benefit because I think I had the social collateral of knowing how to play Judas Priest songs, and so I could get away with being a little different because I could still hang, I guess. I don't know. But
that's how you navigated. That's how you navigated.
It's true. I don't think I've ever had the distinct awareness of thinking, oh, I'm a strange kid. I don't think I've ever thought that.
That's good.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it never happened. Is the answer.
I don't think it did. No. I mean, clearly I was. I mean, fuck, of course. But I mean, I think a lot of how my creative process has evolved is thinking that everybody thinks like me. That's kind of how I've always been. It's not like, oh, I'm different. I'm like, oh, clearly I'm not articulating myself well enough because no one understands. But obviously everybody else is like me. Therefore, it's my fault. Right?
And in fact, yeah. Well,
yeah.
What was the first band you got super into?
First band?
Judas. Does it predate Judas Priest? If you could play the songs, you clearly liked them.
Slade.
Yeah?
Yeah, the band Slade, they released a song Run Runaway in like 1983 or something. You remember that one? I see the chameleon lying there. And I just loved it. That was so good. Yeah. And so I was what I used to do is I used to do puppet shows as a kid where I would take like Eurythmics and Taco and all these like pop bands, and I would have my puppets lip sync them, right? And then I would find the songs that I wanted to do by listening to the radio, and it wasn't until I heard that Slade song that I was just like, wow, that's heavy, man, that's wicked. And so I went looking for it, because you buy the little 45 vinyl records that I would use, and I went looking for it, and I said to the person there, I'm looking for the song Run Runaway. And they're like, oh no, it's this band, it's Bon Jovi, it's their song Runaway. And I was like, oh, it doesn't sound like the name I remember, but okay. And so I was maybe like 12 or 11 or something. I remember taking it home and going, this fucking sucks. This is not what I was looking for, you know? And but Slade was like the first band that I was really into. And then, you know, I liked all the heavy metal stuff like Judas Priest and Wasp, Iron Maiden and Metallica and all that. But it wasn't until probably Jane's Addiction that I got like obsessed by a band. Like that was the first band that really like I was over the moon with, like
Really?
unequivocal. Oh yeah, that
Did you
was
see him live?
nothing shocking. Nothing shocking was a pivotal moment for me as a musician, right? And then it was a band called Grotus that opened up for Mr. Bungle. They were like a local band out of San Francisco.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever been as fascinated with the bands I was by them. And I punished them so fucking hard. Every time they came to Vancouver, I would like wait out the venue and I'd be like, oh, you can stay at my house and all this shit. And they were like, oh, here's that guy. And then it's funny because the singer ended up, his name was Lars, and he ended up being an engineer, and he was like tuning vocals for like Christina Aguilera and all these things. And I used a line from a Grotus song and a strapping song years ago. And so I had to contact Alternative Tentacles and say, hey, is it cool if I use this? And so they gave me his email and I talked to him and I was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, man. My name's Devin. He's like, oh, we remember you, man. You were that fucking guy. You were the guy that punished us every time you came to town, right?
Oh, that's kind of adorable. Yeah. What? Tell us about, so Jane's Addiction, because I was listening to a podcast real recently with Henry Rollins, who's like, oh, I wasn't a fan of Jane's when I went out on the road with them, maybe Lollapalooza or something. But he's like, 3 nights in, I was like there and I'm like watching the crowd and everyone knows every word and people are like crowd surfing and it's an experience and it's the whole thing. What did you see them in this mode, or was it just was it an experience like that kind of won you over?
Well, I have this tendency as a participant of music to create. Yeah,
you're an active participant.
I am.
Yeah,
and still am.
Yeah,
but I would create scenarios in my head based on what I interpreted of the music, and it was the echo on his voice. It was because he was out of tune and he had echo, and it sounded just so. It was like such a middle finger. Like after being taught that music has to be certain ways, there's this real sense of because it has echo on it, it's like fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, it's out of tune, fuck you. And I love that. And so I went and saw the first date of the Lollapalooza tour that they were on in Enumclaw, Washington. I saw the very first day.
This is the show I think they're talking about. Yeah,
I was there. I was there, and I had the opposite experience of Rollins. I was like, oh, they're a bunch of people.
Ew.
You know, it's like because up to that point I had sort of created this like, oh, they're not people. They're like, you know, yeah. But then all of a sudden I was like, oh, it's just a dude, and it was healthy, I think, to recognize that. And from that point, I liked the music, but it was not the same level of participation, right?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's funny. Well, we can be at the same thing and have the complete opposite experience.
Very much, very much, yeah.
So, and your history was studying music. How old were you when you started?
I never really studied music.
You did on some level. I'm talking just as a person. I mean,
it's just all. It was all school. That's as far as I took any studies. It was like band and choir, and I played tuba. And there were some music theory classes, but my knowledge of music has been rudimentary since the beginning. But I think that's been a benefit to a certain extent, because then I don't feel like I had to get it right. I was like, well, I know enough to communicate with people, but I'm not theoretically super proficient. And it was only over the past 5 years that I've had to, because I've been working with orchestras recently, which has been great. But I also realized that if I can't communicate with them, it's going to take twice as long.
Yeah.
So I started taking theory classes again. And so my keyboard that's here is all, I've got the notes laid out on it. And I had to study, the voices in which certain instruments reside, like the viola exists in this range and the violin exists in this range and the cello exists in this range. And it was super frustrating because I had to go from, I've got all these ideas, and it goes blah, 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 to being like, Mary had a little, right? So it was like weird, right? But
you're still learning.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's the line back to an orchestra to your childhood?
It's all 70s musicals.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. So that's the other thing you're into at this point?
I think when I was a kid, just because it was, I've said it before, but it's worth repeating that musicals were like broad strokes, you know, they weren't subtle. They're like happy, sad, you know, angry. It's like, it's super easy. And I could see by watching the people on the screen, like what angry sounds like, if that makes sense, or what sad sounds like. I could say, oh, clearly that's a sad part. I mean, look at them. They're like, and then, and so I learned a lot from that. And then it wasn't until later that I recognized that, or I was told at least, that certain things that I grew up with, like West Side Story or, you know, Jesus Christ Superstar, or any of these things, like were theoretically super intense, right? Specifically West Side Story, like Leonard Bernstein, like his arrangements were crazy. But now when I go to watch it, it's like, you know, it's a little rough. It's a little rough, you know what I mean? Like the lyrics are a little hard to take, right? But I think orchestrally, it was also the Dark Crystal soundtrack, the movie The Dark Crystal.
Yeah.
Like, I just loved it, man. I loved the soundtrack. I had it and I just played it every day. And, you know,
it shows. Like,
yeah.
none of this stuff, this is nothing's an accident. Like it all gets distilled down into the thing. What about heavy metal? I mean, you've grown up at a pretty good time.
Yeah. Well, heavy metal was interesting for me as well, because it was really evocative. I think that was the thing that I find sometimes I miss with more of the more recent metal stuff. I think a lot of what I liked was the really early heavy metal stuff, like the 1972, like Judas Priest, Sad Wings of Destiny sort of stuff. And even though I wasn't a huge fan, but Black Sabbath had a similar sort of vibe, but it had a very like Motorhead too. I loved Motorhead, and it just had, when you put it on, it was evocative. It made me think of things, right? Like the song "I Got Mine" by Motorhead. There's something about the chorus on the guitar and the echo on the vocals, and the solo for the live version of "Victim of Change" it was just very Spartan, I guess, but blues based in ways that things aren't now. And I found it really kind of haunted in a weird way. And it drew me to that. And then, you know, then there's all the social stuff that if you are a weird kid, which I'm just figuring out,
I'm sorry.
is like, no, now my cover's blown.
Yeah, it's
but
fine.
It was like,
I guess guess I'm a weird kid and I'm just projecting it on.
We all. I'm joking because everybody is.
I
think the weird ones are the ones that.
I read Gone with the Wind when I was 9. Like I hid in the library. I had really big glasses.
Amazing.
Like, I was a dork, man. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm just looking for solidarity.
That's amazing.
I'm looking for solidarity. Okay.
You got it.
Yeah, thank you.
You got it.
I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
You're
welcome.
Cool. Well, it's the attitude thing. Yeah. The blues and attitude.
Yeah.
And it's attitude, really, isn't it? Like, isn't blues a lot of attitude? In a genuine way, like not cultivated attitude, but real deep.
I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know.
I wonder if the attitude is rooted in something that's a little more primal, right? Like I was never, although I respected like we've talked about, I respect the hell out of Zappa. I think he's brilliant, but it was not my bag. And I think maybe it was there's a real primal element of Captain Beefheart that I loved. It just seemed really rooted in like the earth, right? And or maybe in the emotions rather than in the mind. And I tend to think too much, but I think I'm emotionally like fairly aware, at least. So I think that blues responds to that part of my mind, I think.
Yeah, that's
the emotional side of it.
Yeah. Well, it's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. For some music.
Yeah.
Like some of it is pretty brainy, right?
It's some of it's exhausting. I don't know whether most of it's exhausting, and sometimes you just want to hear a person, and you know. Was it? Yeah, Ego Cavalera was saying recently, he's like, sometimes it feels like going out to see metal bands. It's like going to the circus. Like, oh, I can balance a plate on here, and I can balance a plate on here, and I can balance a plate on here. When it's just like you just want to hear that kind of line from here to there, and that's the.
I understand. I understand. I mean, metal for me is difficult just because. I mean, when life gets intense, I don't want to listen to intense things. It's like I find that I want to listen to intense things when life isn't intense.
Yeah.
And because things have been so intense over the past year or two, I mean, I don't find myself gravitating towards heavy, intense sounds, right? Like I like quiet, chilled out things because it just seems like when I come home at the end of a long day, I mean, like, really metal right now? Are you kidding me? It's been crazy all day. Like fucking just everything would be quiet. I'd be psyched, right? But maybe that's just getting older too, right?
I think but there's a lot to. I've never met anyone who made heavy metal music who listened to heavy metal exclusively. I think
that's probably good
in my entire life, and I don't think that would be a good idea.
I wonder if Manowar does though.
I wonder what Manowar is listening to right now.
Probably Manowar.
On repeat.
Yeah. Just over and over.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now this is a fun fact that I happen to know from interviewing you 100 times. You lost your virginity to Def Leppard's Hysteria.
I think so.
Yes, allegedly.
According it was in that general frame of time where that, like, to refine that statement a little bit, there's certain periods in your life where certain music becomes the soundtrack.
Yes.
You know, so I think more so than literally so.
Yes.
It was that period of my life in which Def Leppard Hysteria was the soundtrack.
Did you have the hair and the whole thing? Did you embrace the entire culture? Like,
I tried, but the problem is my hair was terrible, right? So I remember there was this girl that I knew that crimped her hair, and I thought it was super cool. It was like, it looked like electricity, right? So I started crimping my hair, and then because I am not particularly diligent when it comes to, you know, taking care of hair, at least, I went to a barbershop and got it permed into a crimp perm, which didn't work. So it just turned into this massive floof. But as opposed to cutting it, which would have been the thing to do, would be to cut it. But I didn't. I just let it grow until by the time I graduated, I had like greasy hair to there, and then just this poof at the end of it, right? But no, when it came to see with Def Leppard, it wasn't the music as much for Def Leppard. I did like
it probably shouldn't be.
I love the production. That was the thing.
Really?
It was super cool sounding. Like everything else sounded small compared to that, right? And I love that. So I kind of gravitated towards that because I've always liked sound. Yeah. And Def Leppard Hysteria sounded so much better than Grim Reaper. You know what I mean? Like Grim Reaper sounded fucking horrible. And I remember that was the thing at the time because my buddy just loved Grim Reaper. And I remember like the Sea and Hell record and all this, but it was so gross sounding, right? Like that, although I liked it, I never put it on because I was like, oh God, this is not guitar sound, right? And so I think I gravitated to Def Leppard or Enya or what's another one that had great production at the time? Like a lot of the pop music, like the Outfield and all these sorts of things. And what was that band from Australia I loved? Ice House, was that it?
Ice House. Yeah,
I love
Electric
Great Southern Land. Yeah.
Electric.
The only song was Great Southern Land. That was the only one for me, and I loved it because there was a movie. What's it called? Young Einstein. That it was on the soundtrack.
I love that movie. That movie is the best.
Yeah, I saw it a ton.
Yahoo series.
Yep. Yeah. I wonder what he's doing now.
That was, look, man, naming yourself Yahoo Serious is a strong ass move, you know.
It is a strong move.
It's like
you can go one of two ways. You can go one of two ways.
And I have to say, as far as I know, it's obscurity. As far as I know, the path that he ended up getting to choose was obscurity, and that's fine. It's fine.
Good.
But that's probably happy. Culture. Yeah. When were you making songs? At what point did this translate?
I think I started probably, I must have been about 7 or 8, because my grandparents had like an electric organ that was always on, the one with the bright colored, buttons, right? And I remember being able to identify melodies that it didn't strike me as being particularly, you didn't need a lot of talent to do it, but I remember my parents were, and my grandparents were surprised. They were like, "Oh, wow, you're able to pick out those melodies." I remember that as a kid.
Awesome.
And me thinking, "Oh, okay, great." Right. And so I remember I probably would sit there and write, but even with that, there was a sustain pedal with the organ that I loved, right? Ever since I can remember, ever since as far back as I can remember, I just loved echo. I loved reverb, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny now because I have people who are like, "Well, you should make music without it." And I'm like, why? I really like it.
I've been into it forever, your whole life.
It's true. Yeah. It's true.
Even Jane's Addiction.
Yeah, and Judas Priest.
Yeah, and Judas.
It was that. Yeah, KK Downing. That's the reason I like the band, is because the singer and the guitar player used echo.
It's that simple.
It really was, on some level, I think, that simple. Yeah.
So you were writing stuff and like writing words and stuff from that being that little?
I don't think I started writing words until a little older. I was probably more like 14 or 15 before I started writing words. I mean, as a kid, I don't know how much I had to say, right? Like, I don't like this type of food, and I do like this type of food. It would have been something like that.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I got into a relationship and had to deal with more practical life things that words started becoming appropriate.
And universal things as well. What do you remember the soundtrack to your first breakup? I went and bought 4 CDs, so I'm just saying I remember it vividly. So
what were yours?
Well, no one cares about what I'm going. I suppose I can tell you. It was DJ Shadow Introducing. It was that Fiona Apple one with the really long thing, really long name, and like some weird electronic music album. So nothing cool, but that DJ Shadow Introducing was a very good, cool idea at the time.
Well, I think you're significantly younger than I. So
sorry. But I'm also aging myself. So this was a terrible idea.
Oh, that's great. That when I hear that, I'm thinking, oh my God, I was probably fucking 60 when that came out. Yeah. No, I think for me it's not like breaking up from a relationship wasn't significant for me, because it was, but I don't think it was nothing burned into my mind. Music has a very specific role for me, and it is often not tied to emotional events as much as times, right? So there's not a song that when I think of something traumatic that happened that I think, oh, that song is a soundtrack to it. More so during that period in which that traumatic event happened, there was a collection of music that defined it, right? Yeah. And that's actually that's even how I write. It's always been the case. So as I'm writing this right now, so I'm in this studio here, it's not my studio, obviously. It's like I'm in somebody else's, I'm in this producer's house, right? And so every day I write, and I'm finding that it's just it's more of a situation of trying to coalesce all these things that have happened into some sort of identity that can then define a period, but none of them are about anything. None of the songs are about a breakup or a romance or anything. It's just this vague aesthetic, right?
Well, it's like you're creating micro musical movements. It's like a musical movement that has all this color and flavor, and it lived during it. A movement is something that occupies a period of time, right?
That makes sense.
Like a Renaissance movement, or you kind of creating your own movement where there's some sort of thread between them.
It happens alongside of life, yet is crucial to my ability to move on from a certain thing, right? So it's like, if I'll write 30 songs during a particular period, which I'm getting towards that point here now.
Awesome.
I can't for example, take that the unused songs and use it for the next one because it doesn't have any bearing on it. It's within this period. So what tends to happen is I'll put it all out. Like I'll release a record and then a bonus record and then all this sort of stuff. And it's only because, and then sometimes people tend to be, the comments are, oh, that song that's on the bonus record is a better song than what is on the actual one. I was like, I agree. However, it wasn't what was meant to be on the main one. The main one's supposed to be a certain thing, right? And that just it drew me out of the experience to hear that one in there, regardless of the quality of it. So, but I've been writing for this thing now. I mean, honestly, Christine, I finished 2 records last week and I started the new one the day after, right? So it's been
yeah.
There's a lot to say right now.
Yeah, there is a lot to say. You have a lot to say.
Yeah.
You have a lot to say. More so than you ever have?
In some sense, yeah. But it has to be, I have to define how to say it because I think that it's very, it's problematic to just say things without having analyzed my motivations to do so. Because I don't think going back to like, and it's funny, we'll keep bringing it back to this, going back to as a kid.
Yeah. Well,
I felt like unless I'm able to articulate this stuff in a way that is really clear, it's going to seem insane. So it's like the path has been, it's the same thing every time. It's just like finding different ways to like refine it.
Yeah.
And then, so now I've got this, not a block, but there's a part of me that's like, well, you know exactly what it is that you want to say, but how to say it is really a subtle thing, right? Like it's trying to really get down to the brass tacks of it, but in a way that removes my own trip from it in a sense.
Wow.
Because I think that's what's going to make it super weird. If you love A Rainy Day, for example, it's like, it's one thing to say, oh, I like it when it rains out. But I also think it's worth saying to yourself, okay, well, what about it? What about the rain do you like? How does it make you feel? And then why is that important for you? And by writing from that point of view, simply saying, I like it when it rains is like problematic because it doesn't express it. So, but the process of figuring it out often leads to the fact it's like, oh, okay, then next. And then you get that one out of the way and you're like, okay, well, what is it that I like right now? Okay, well, maybe I like, so I've got this thing now where it's like Lighthouse. I don't know what it is, but there's something about a lighthouse that I really dig. I don't know what it is, but really somewhere cool. Somewhere in there is whatever I'm working on, I think. So I just keep following it and then excavate it. It's like some weird archaeological thing. And then by the end of it, you're able to say, okay, well, there's your reason why that was an attraction to you at that point.
So it comes, so you get when you finish the outcome, it tells you why.
Yeah. But I think that's less of it's less of like a mystical event and more that I'm just emotionally have typically been really stunted. So I don't know what I'm feeling until days after. It's like a lot of times I'd be in a band and people are like, man, you don't say things until it's too far gone. And I'm like, well, the reason I don't say it is because I don't know what I'm feeling. So when I say it prematurely, I end up just creating a swath of destruction of me just being like, oh, I'm pissed off. Oh, I'm upset. Oh, I'm sad, whatever. And at the end, I was like, oh, he hurt my feelings or whatever it is. Like, but in order for me to figure that out, it's like I'm not aware enough of what I'm feeling. Yeah. So my process has just evolved that I just have to kind of follow these subconscious clues. And at the end of it, I've got some closure on it, I guess.
That's it's an interesting way it's an interesting way music is integrated into your emotional like calibration.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I came from a very kind of typically British upbringing, and overt displays of emotion were uncouth, right? But as a kid who was hyper emotional,
Yeah.
it's like I had no place to put it, right? And so music became this kind of socially accepted way to do that. And so everything hardwired to it. And I think a lot of my process now is trying to find ways to, and I've been successful to a certain degree, of like bringing some of that back into life.
Yeah.
So it's not all in the music, right?
I mean, none of us know what we're doing, like with this emotional stuff. Like,
Nope.
no one, like it's really flying blind. It's good that you actually have an outlet and you've actually had
I agree.
this, like this connection with people. I mean, you've been doing it for decades. You've been literally doing it for decades. Isn't that nuts? That you've kind of gotten to not gotten to, because that's gotten to is the wrong language.
No, I agree. I agree with gotten to. I think it's,
like,
I've got the benefit of being stubborn, so I tend to just keep charging ahead, right? Like whether or not it's appropriate or advisable, it's just kind of my personality. I just kind of see a point B and then just find a way to get to it. And that's whether or not it's moving a pile of rocks from one place to the other or like finishing a project in time. It's the same mechanism, right? I just bullheaded.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if there's anything this past year has made me aware of is well, how grateful I am for the opportunity to do it, and how that gratitude extends to the writing process now is something that I hadn't been aware of prior. I had always assumed that the compulsion to write was based on ego or something, but I think more so than that, the compulsion to write is rooted in an expression of gratitude. And I believe that now more than ever. It's like, oh, I'm really thankful that, I have these people around me and I have the ability to do what I do and I can eat and my limbs work and all these things. And so music, that's the reason. And I think that prior to that realization, I had gone down these kind of nihilistic rabbit holes of like, oh, art is futile and love is futile and all these sorts of things. But that got sorted during this past couple of years, maybe just because I've been forced to sort of sit with some of the darkness that I've not had the opportunity to because I've been on tour for fucking ever, right?
People brought you a snack. You don't have to, no emotional processing today. You have a snack, you got a show, take a nap.
Yeah.
Emotion.
Well, there is a certain amount, but it's a different type of processing, the tour one, because what I found problematic with touring was the person that I'm trying to refine, whoever I am, try and make myself more functional as a adult human. Touring and the lifestyle and the attention that gets paid to you as a singer in a band is in direct opposition to all of that growth in so many ways. So in order to find ways to navigate that, the work that I have on tour is like, how do you function with some degree of honesty while being defended? And that's like it's like a very unique experience, and it's fucking exhausting, right?
Has it always felt like this? How has it kind of changed from like, because going back to the fan thing, like,
I made peace with it. That's how it changed. But I mean, it's always been that way because my objective was not to necessarily play on stage. It was just to write.
Well,
that's all I really wanted to do.
How did that change? I mean, you did the Vi record.
I think being insecure, and when I was younger, all of a sudden you get on stage and then it's like, oh, this is cool. All of a sudden I've got some sort of social collateral, which I've never had before, and it's intoxicating, right? But then you find that it's like, before you know it, that's your job. And you're like, oh, now that I'm through that, now this is actually a lot of work. When I realized that my need for it when I was younger was based on things that maybe I hadn't sorted out yet, right? But as you get older and you do sort it out, then I struggled with it for a while because I was like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, that doesn't make any sense now. But then there's a certain value that comes from that for me, like being thrust into something that's out of my comfort zone has yielded a ton for me. Like, I think that had I not had to tour, I don't think I would have grown in the ways that I had, because there would have been no reason. I would have just been like, oh, I'll just watch TV, you know? Yeah.
Your emotion, so it's actually, so an enormous part of your emotional growth is through music and the whole experience.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
What was it like to hold a record that you'd done yourself in your hands for the first time? And what with Steve Vai, with that, was that the first one, or did you put out a bunch of stuff before that and we just
I had demos and things. The demos I got a real kick
actually tell us about the demos. Yeah.
Well, I had two bands
releases or things.
I had three bands prior. I had the first band was called Gray Skies, and we did a little demo that was cool. I love that. And then we did a band called Noisescapes, which was basically me and the drummer. And then I remember we picked up from Precision Sound in Vancouver like 200 cassettes, and we had done all that, and it was really cool. And
what was the artwork?
Strangely, we had some shitty preset on Photoshop that, because we were so blown away by the computer actually doing something, we didn't care it was a preset. We're like, oh, perfect. It'll work great. It'll work great.
This is what the guy from fucking Converge was saying. He's just like, everyone had Photoshop. It could all do one thing. So we'd gone from the Misfit skull to everything looking like a Comic Sans school project. It was not a good moment.
Yeah, all my logos were bubble logos, and it was pretty grim. But strangely, when I got the first record from Steve Vai, like when we did that one, it was so full of upheaval emotionally and personally, that it was more a representation of something that I was struggling with, and I wasn't as psyched on it, to be honest. It was like, and not the music and not Steve or anything, but just like Def Leppard surrounded that period of my life, Sex and Religion surrounded that period of my life. And as you can imagine, I was a kid with stars in his eyes, and I was like, oh, I'm going to LA and I'm going to be in a band and it's going to be all this sort of stuff. And I get there and I was like, same thing with the Jane's Addiction. I said like 400 times so far.
No.
All right, 402. But when I got to LA, I was like, oh, it's a bunch of humans. He's not a god. It's like a bunch of people. And so Sex and Religion as an album was the soundtrack to this sort of violent deflowering that happened back then, right? There's 403.
Poetic.
Yeah, it's true.
It's deflowering to your starry-eyed.
I'm so glad. I'm super grateful for that too. Had that not been the case, had I not gone through that, perhaps I, would still have the desire to wear sunglasses inside.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's that whole thing that I remember being in LA for the first week and thinking, wow, look at this. It's that guy. It's this person. It's wow. And after a week, I was like, wow, they're full of shit. Everybody's full of shit. The only person that isn't full of shit isn't in a band, and he's still my friend now. You know what I mean? So that was, but I think in terms of the first time I actually had a product in my hand that I thought, oh, this is right.
Yeah.
It was probably Terria, because that was the first time that I worked with Travis Smith, whom I work with still. And I didn't realize how important artwork was for me. And so now, like with the puzzle, with Lightwork, with everything I'm working on now, the artwork starts before the music. And so now up on my screen here, it's the current work. It's the current art. So we did Empath and everything. It's all tied in together. So when it's done, when I get the physical thing in my hands, it's a complete analogy for that particular period. It looks like it. It's like, it feels like it. It's the same color. I've been staring at it. It's that, right? So Terria was the first time where I got the CD and I was like, oh, good. All right. The font's right.
This makes sense.
Because a lot of the other time it's like we had 404. We had a whole bunch of people that would be working on the artwork that I wasn't there in the room for, and I get the font back, and like you say, it's like Comic Sans, and I'm thinking that has nothing to do with what that period felt like.
Yeah,
it's goofy, it's like ridiculous. But with Terria was the first one where the font was right.
Yeah,
and I remember looking at it and going, "Oh, cool, okay, right on."
This feels like my not alien thing, like.
Well, it feels like the closest I can get to a tangible representation of what it felt like.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. That's what it looks like. Yeah. And so, I did this film I just finished it. Well, the final happens tomorrow, actually, but
yeah,
I made a movie for this puzzle project that I did. And that's the first time where I've been thinking, oh, it sounds like it. It looks like it. It's the right font, and it's me. And it's it's a budget. Of course, it's not like it was expensive, but it wasn't like a Hollywood thing.
Yeah.
So it's only going to be as good as it can get. But there's really something fascinating about creating a moment in time that I can then recall.
Yeah.
So I'm building a studio that I want to put this Atmos thing in, which is like this. It's like the same sort of system that they have in movie theaters. So it's like almost like virtual sound, where you can have the sound here or there or whatever. I don't know how people are going to listen to it, but regardless, I really think that that's kind of like the next step. I would really like to be able to explore that. So ultimately, the things that I end up creating can be as close to a representation of that time period, for better or for worse, as I can get, right? So Terria, there's my longest answer ever. Terria.
That's Terria. Well, it's 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Whoa. And you were pretty deep into, I mean, you put out a bunch of stuff before that.
Yeah, I would have been 29 with Terria because that's part of the lyrics. But
right.
That's ages ago. Yeah.
What about, so how did you feel about the stuff that came before? Didn't
I thought City and Ocean Machine were good.
Yeah.
And
what about all the strapping stuff?
Yeah, City.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But prior to Terria, it had only been City and Heavy's a Really Heavy Thing. And Heavy's a Really Heavy Thing was like a demo. It was cool. There's just me screaming fuck a lot. But it's like, even at that, I remember thinking, because at the time I loved Fear Factory and Carcass and Pitch Shifter and all these things, and it didn't sound like that. Like the kick drum didn't sound like that. And I remember thinking, oh, I didn't get it right. I mean, to be fair, it was just me. I didn't know how to. I didn't have Colin Richardson. I didn't have any of these. I didn't have a label, so I was doing it myself. But I still wanted it to sound right. So when we did City, it was because I had produced a Stuck Mojo record in Atlanta with Daniel Bergstrand, who had done Destroy, Erase, Improve by Meshuggah.
Yeah, right.
And I remember listening to Destroy, Erase, Improve in my little Ford Focus or whatever it was, Ford Escort. And I remember thinking, oh, it sounds better than the Fear Factory record. That's awesome. I want to work with that guy. And so when I finally got to do City, I got to do it with Daniel. And so I went to Sweden and then he mixed it. And then I went back to Spain and he mixed Ocean Machine as well. So those are the first two records that sonically I was happy with, but visually I still wasn't, right? And Infinity, I did all by myself. That was entirely on my own, and it fucking sounded horrible, but it was the closest to the vision that I had gotten as well. So it's like this weird kind of balancing act. It's never really, it's like you're herding cats. You get one of them and another one goes that way, right? So,
but it is what you're listening to is on your sleeve a bit. Like no one's creating music in a vacuum. It's all coming from what you're listening to.
I think if you were, it would just sound the same as what you did before, right?
Yeah.
But this is what.
Yeah.
Well, this is why it's interesting to me that sometimes the fact that every record is different is confusing to people, because I think I'm not in a vacuum. I can't be. My life. And that's why it was so interesting to do these interviews the other days when people were talking to me as if this 2 years of absolute traumatic chaos for the entire species didn't exist. Yeah. They're like, so what's your plans? Have you been working on it? Have you been? And I'm just like, I don't know about you, man, but I've been fucking in my pajamas freaking out for 2 years trying to figure out how to make it work.
Well,
you
this
know,
is,
like what the fuck is wrong? Like, how come, you know? And it's the same thing with the shows too. Like I was watching this download thing and everybody's on stage like, I want to see all you motherfuckers. And I'm like, didn't we all just go through something crazy? Like, this doesn't make sense to me now to see it like that.
This is coping mechanisms. This is some people's coping mechanisms is pretending it didn't happen. This is just some. This
I don't know.
Coping. Like,
I think that I don't think society is that dumb. And I mean, I think there's a lot of people that would argue with me, but I don't think that society is well, maybe on the surface, but I think
your faith in their intelligence is very it's admirable.
I've been told this, and perhaps that's my failing, but I think that well, I just think that maybe not on the surface, but maybe somewhere underneath that is this like, holy fuck. No, I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
I don't know. I think we're all just a mess of coping mechanisms and all that sort of stuff. But
I agree.
How is what you're working on now a reflection of you as a lifelong fan?
Well, I don't know if I'm a fan of.
Yeah. Are you a lifelong fan
of my own stuff?
Of music? No, music.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, of course.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about as a lifelong fan of myself. And I'm thinking, wow, that'd be like, once I'm finished a record, I never want to hear it again, right? Like, I mean, can you ask the question once more? I'm sorry.
Yeah. How is what you're doing right now a reflection of you as a lifelong fan? What kind of things have you held dear your whole life that have kind of finally come to fruition in these works?
I feel that if I'm writing in a way that is true to my intentions at that moment, then the act of writing solves me, calms me. So when I get something right, it's because I'm like, that's what it sounds like. But it's the process of finding what that is often involves like numerous different pathways that aren't right. Yeah. And it's super frustrating. Like I'll write a song or I'll write a big long piece of music, and then I'm listening to it in the car, waiting for it to like say, yeah, that's it. But when it isn't, you go down that whole thing as an artist, just like, I'll never be able to write again and blah, blah, blah. But then when you do get it right, it's a compulsion for me, because I think the only word I can use is it solves me to hear it. And so, like yeah, a puzzle. Yeah, for the moment, because it's like maybe because I'm not able to articulate myself emotionally particularly well. When I do hear something, it helps me figure out what's going on. So, like when I did this puzzle thing, it's chaos. It's absolute dark, gross chaos.
I just realized you need to explain it to people what's actually going on. So
that's going to be a hard one, only because my brain is on this Lightwork thing now, and puzzle's over. So
we missed the window.
No, we don't. But today is difficult for me to talk about it. But I'll do my best. But
yeah,
the thing is, I wanted to document the last 2 years of what we went through with puzzle. I want to make a film. I don't want to forget it. Yeah. And as much as I see this kind of weird gaslit thing where everybody's like, oh, it never happened. Shows are back. What have you been doing? Hey, what's your plans for the next year? Blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I'm thinking, no.
No,
this fucking happened. This fucking happened. So I made a document of puzzle, and ultimately puzzle is, you are not your biases. You are not your coping mechanisms. What you are is beyond that. And to recognize that is where some degree of peace comes, right? And that we're worthy of that is almost the most important takeaway from it. But then when that was finished, all of a sudden, because puzzle is gross, it's not a beautiful experience. I mean, the second half of it, Snuggles, is pretty for sure. but it's also not beautiful. It's that's a coping, yeah, of course. And that's a coping mechanism, that one for sure. But Lightwork, the thing that I'm doing now is like on the other side of that. And so now it's like really, it's heavy and it's concise and it's clean and it's got this weird sort of synth wavy kind of aesthetic way down in the background underneath the heavy metal stuff, that when I hit on that, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And then after doing Puzzle, where there's no form, it's 75 minutes of stream of conscience chaos, ugly stream of chaos. Yeah, it's fucking ugly.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, I think you'll really enjoy it.
I will. I love a mess. I love a cathartic mess. Okay, I'm all about a cathartic mess.
What it is. Yeah. But I think that the thing I'm working on now is the opposite of that, as it always is. It's like once you squeeze all the arteries, what Puzzle was this gross, oily fucking mess, right? But then once that was out, I'm like, oh, I'm good to go now. I'm going to write some short, concise, clean, melodic things.
You made a
and then after, in a sense, and then after this one, who knows? It's like everything's a reaction to the one before, and so I think it'll be interesting because the Lightwork record is really accessible and Puzzle is absolutely not, like, at all. So might as well cover our bases, right?
Yeah. Be prolific enough, tick all the boxes.
Yeah.
Just got to be prolific enough.
But that's not my intention also. It's clear. It's important for me to make that clear.
You are being prolific though.
Well, no. I am, for sure. But what I was meaning, I'm sorry, was it wasn't my intention to tick all the boxes. Because it's I don't know until I'm in it what is going to solve it for the moment. And after doing Puzzle, everything that I wrote that was complicated, I was just kind of like, ugh, I did that. Yeah, I want something clean, right? So I did that.
When you're making it, what do you listen to? Like, do you listen to specific things to keep you in the mode of a record or something? Like
never intentionally.
Yeah. What were you listening to in the weirdest strapping parts? What were
Morbid Angel.
Yeah.
The Young Gods, Cop Shoot Cop. She Had, actually, the album Killjoy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a random Kiwi thing.
Yeah. The Cure, Wish. I think that was the name of the album, or Open.
Yeah.
Bark Market. The Old Lady Drivers, Grave, like that's kind of what was going on at that time, right?
Yeah, and it's
yeah, but I can remember all the things that's
amazing
that happened during each period. Like right now, I listen to down tempo electronic chill and spa music, right? And so it's that with heavy metal on it, right?
Let's talk about Enya briefly.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry, is that hard?
Absolutely.
I feel like we should talk about Enya.
I love Enya.
We did try and find Enya, everyone. Like, she's really hard to find. We did actually go through my notes. We went
That's
to
very kind of you.
Yeah, we went and we all want Enya, okay? Look, she's serious. How did you find Enya and at what point?
It was Orinoco Flow. I heard it on the radio, and it was light years beyond anything else in the radio, yet it was still popular, and I love that. That's like I've always loved things that are like things but different. So, I wanted when I was a kid, I had a beige Marshall stack. I didn't have a brown one, or I didn't have a black one. I had the beige one, and I liked that because it was the same thing but it was different. And I loved the idea of something that's marketed like a Big Mac, but it's actually a veggie burger. Like, I love that. Like, there's something about that I find really endearing, because I like commercial music. For example, when I was a kid, I loved listening to the radio. I loved listening to all these things. But then when it came down to finding, when it came down to the things that I really liked were the things that were on the radio that were completely different than everything else, but they still fit in. I love it. It still worked. And that was the thing with Enya. It was the thing with Slade. It was like they were still accepted, but they were fucking completely out to lunch. Like Orinoco Flow, it was a big hit, but like I'd never heard anything like it. But it was still melodic. It was still, the production was great. It was beautiful. It was all these things, but it really appealed to me because it gave me hope that you could be who you are and still fit in some sense. And I don't know why fitting in, maybe it's just an adolescent thing, but fitting in was like, you know, I don't want to be a freak. I don't want to be like, you know, I take no pride in, you know, being the black sheep or anything. It doesn't appeal to me, really. I'm just like everybody else. It's so, but I don't do that. I do this. So Enya really appealed to me because that's exactly what it suggested to me, you know?
But you are that. That's the weird thing. You are those things. You sit in it makes sense. You make sense in the context of heavy metal, but you're often your own thing. You have become these, oh my God, you are Enya.
I'm looking for it.
You've taken the Enya approach. No, but you are,
well, I mean,
that's really interesting. The things you love is actually kind of what people love about you.
Well, I mean, which is wonderful.
Which is awesome.
Absolutely. But I also feel that again, it's.
Sorry, I'm yelling.
No, it's fine. It's funny. I did this interview the other day, and this, because like you say, I've been doing it for so many years. This person looked at my career and the trajectory that it took and all the decisions that I have made that allowed me to be in this place that I'm super grateful for. But he was talking to me like I had done it on purpose and that it was really a clever thing on my part. And I was like, I would love to claim this as being intentional. I would love to claim that I heard Enya. I was like, well, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to find ways to do it. Fucking not at all. I just am pig-headed.
Yeah.
And I like what I like. Which
is pretty much two of the most important things you need as an artist to be.
I'm afraid so.
To be tenacious. Like it's really, we all have great, wonderful ideas that are going to sit on the cutting room floor for the time. Like imagine if we could sweep through the cutting room floor ideas of everyone who's had, man, we should do a thing. Totally, and you've actually done them.
Yeah. To a large degree. But I also think that, you know, it's, I don't go to parties. I don't go to gigs. I don't like parties. I don't like gigs, you know, like these are things that have never been of much appeal. So I feel like I had a lot of extra time, you know,
just make use of it.
That's kind of what I felt like when I was a kid. Everybody would be going to the parties and I'd go, but then I'd be thinking, oh, is this what we do now? Do we just do this for the next 4 hours? Okay. All right. And so I would tend to just not go. And then after a while, I just found like I had a whole lot of things done. And now that I'm older and have the opportunity to create in the ways that I do, I don't take it lightly. So I've tried to really make my process as efficient as possible so that when I do have time, I can make a ton of content. And it's, the intention is not, or the goal is not the content. The goal is the purge, right? So the more efficient I become, the less gear that I have, the more I can kind of get everything in an organized fashion that I can say, okay, one cable, one preamp, one delay, one reverb, then I can just haul ass, right? Yeah. And for me, that's of significant value.
Yeah. That's a pretty good advice to just get your like fireman, get your fireman outfit set up ready next to the pole. Like this isn't a joke. This is not a drill.
Exactly.
This is not a drill. I mean, like it's gonna go away. The fire's gonna burn out. You've got a limited amount of time. Get out there.
I mean, this is true. And this is why it's difficult writing here because this isn't my place, right? It's like not my stuff. So while I'm here, I'm like reaching for things and I'm like, oh, that's not there. And it's like, so I slowly start to refine it. But I also think that there's a benefit of that too, because it puts me again out of my comfort zone. It's if you do the same thing over and over and over again, even if it's efficient, after a while, I think I really run the risk of repeating myself. So just by being like, oh, that's not mine, or this isn't my
thingy,
whatever. Yeah, it's not my thingy. Then you have to cope with it. And it's yielding interesting things for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So, but the fireman analogy, that's great. Have the fire outfit right by the pole, because
we're gonna have to.
you're gonna have to
burn. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What I keep doing this and then going, and I've said this in the show now 3 times. What are 5 songs that changed your life? And then I say I probably should have given you some warning for that, but
No, it's okay.
I'm dropping it. Maybe it's more real to do it straight.
There's so many, but I guess the ones that are more in the formative stages. Valley of the Birds by Emerald Webb, Burning Down by King's X, Brown by Grotus, Mountain Song, or no, Ocean Size by Jane's Addiction, and probably that one song in that Young Gods album that I don't know the name of because I listened to it, and there's so many though. It's more albums than songs for me though.
Yeah.
You know.
What would the 5 albums be? Those ones?
Formula by Old Lady Drivers, Darker by Night by Rapoon, Songs of India by Ravi Shankar and George Harrison.
Awesome.
Other ones that I got 2 more. I don't know. I have to think on them.
Enya.
Because there's ones that but it's that was more of a love rather than a
change.
Like a change. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just loved it. It was just wonderful, right? But it wasn't like everything was different after that, right?
Yeah.
I probably put King's X into there as much as I did.
Why? What did they do to you?
Well, I didn't like it when I first heard it, which is one thing, because everybody told me that they were like the next thing. Like that was the ad that they had in the magazine. It's like King's X is this is the band. And then when I heard it, I was like, oh, it's like not super heavy. It kind of has this Beatles thing. I was never a huge Beatles fan, right?
Yeah.
But there was something about, I just kept listening to it and it just kept sort of burrowing in. And then before I knew it, it was a part of my DNA.
Yeah.
And I think as well, probably Soul of a New Machine too. That first Fear Factory record was a huge thing for me, you know, and obviously I've spent lots of time with those guys, and I met Dino and everybody prior to that first record, because I was in a local band and we were touring down to LA and we stayed at their place. It was like one of these strange little scenarios, but it was just, that was the first time where I heard those kind of death metal guitar things in a way that my melodic mind liked.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of even though I did like Morbid Angel, and even though I did like Grave or Carcass or you know, to a certain degree Cannibal Corpse, so they're more of a gimmicky thing for me, at least, right? It was,
they're on television.
Melodically, I could never understand the riffs. It didn't seem melodic to me. It just seemed like, which was cool. But then all of a sudden, when Bert put a melody over it, I was like, oh, that's cool. That can be a total tool. You can use that type of guitar thing as a component for really hammering something home. And it was interesting to me that first, and I remember going to see, it was Clutch, Sepultura, and Fear Factory opening in Vancouver, like 1991 or something.
Oh my God.
And I went,
everyone's been around that long. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that is
well, I mean, you look at even the current super popular, like you look at Gajira or Meshuggah, they're all, everybody's 50.
Yeah.
It's not like when we were, or at least when I was a kid, it was like everybody who played in a heavy metal band was like 22. Like all the ones that are, not all of them, of course, but the ones that are worth
the
vast majority, it's a fogey kind of thing, right? So it's like
we did it good. We're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere. Now we know how to do it. Now we know how to do it.
I don't know if you know, we're still good at this. So
we're better than everybody else at it. Like no one's more brutal than Meshuggah and Gajira and all these bands. Yet they're all 50-year-old gray-haired guys that are like, you know, wheezing after the show, right? Like
we need to have some sort of uprising. No, everyone's been listening to you, everyone, for the last 20 years. We don't want you to go away. Just keep going. Keep good.
Well, that's the thing, is it's like it's that old quote of if you just keep showing up, eventually there's a chair for you.
Yeah.
right?
It works.
That's kind of how I feel about it.
How have your fans communicated with you over the pandemic? Because you obviously would have a lot of FaceTime with people on the road and stuff, and they haven't been getting that. And you see a lot of your, I don't want to say markets, but regions, often. How have you been speaking to them? How does it work?
Well, I've been doing, prior to Puzzle and Lightwork, just taking up 100% of my time. And like, I mean that's not like hyperbole, and I'm actually going home at 7 and watching TV. No, it takes up 100% of the time, right? Prior to that, I do Twitch streams. I've done 7 or 8 live stream concerts. I've done about a dozen of these podcasts. I did the Cameo stuff. I mean, I'm always on Twitter, but I think again, it's, pardon me?
You're around.
Yeah, why wouldn't I be, really? I mean, these are the people that allow me to do this, right? Like, it's super important that that it's demonstrated through what I do that I'm sincere when I say I appreciate it, not just lip service, right? So, and oftentimes I feel it's a regret to a certain degree that I can't do more, but it's right now it's just too much. It's been so much, but soon it'll go back.
That's a lot though. And you've just announced a bunch of tour dates. Was it weird?
Have I?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, it is weird. It's super weird. It's super weird. Yeah, it's super weird. I don't
Is it freak you out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But not in a way that's like that would prevent me from doing it, but only because I don't love change. And so, as dramatic and traumatic as the past couple of years have been, there's a schedule.
Yeah.
It's like, I know where I am. I know what's going on. I know where I have to be. I know, even though it's a lot of work and it's a lot of emotional and psychological upheaval, like last winter was dark, right?
Yeah.
At least it's a darkness that I can rely on. And so there's this sense that the next stage is
darkness.
Sometimes it's the devil, right? Like, sometimes people, myself included, it's refuse to change toxic ways of life, simply because on some level there's a comfort derived from its predictability.
Yes.
It's like, why don't I leave this abusive relationship? Well, because at least it's part of the routine.
It's a human tendency. It's like the most human thing we do. We seek the familiar. We're hardwired to seek the familiar. And the trouble is that doesn't work when you're a partner of someone, when you're in an abusive relationship. You're like, well, this is something I'm familiar with. Yeah, this is familiar. Okay, I'll keep doing it. And I swear to God, that was designed to keep us alive when we were out in the fields. Like, okay, this bush feels familiar. Oh, this is where we need to come back to, like, this is where we meet, or this is, I'm not an expert in Neanderthal behavior.
No, but I understand what you're saying. And I understand what you're saying, but I think that perhaps that's the reason why I have some sort of trepidation about going out again, just because it's not just been 2 weeks. It's been almost, by the time I play a show again, other than this Bloodstock thing, it'll be 2 years. And that's like, there's a huge amount of information that will require processing and quantifying, right? And the world has changed, and so touring is not going to be what it once was either. It's not going to be the same, even when it comes down to the venues or lack of crew, or trying to find routing with everybody, trying to find ways to keep their business afloat when there's so much competition for it. And then the new with visas, or a lot of my people that I work with are in the UK, so there's the Brexit and the implications of that, and the price of diesel and the price of getting gear there, and the shipping. It's like everything about this is going to be different. So I think my fear of it is not a real, like, oh, I'm afraid of going on tour, as much as just like, it's been a lot to process over the past couple of years, and the upcoming tours seem like a lot to process. So, you know, out of the frying pan kind of thing, right? So that's probably where it comes from.
You're going to stay in Lightwork land.
Pardon me? Well, this is a crazy one too. Like, this project is not easy because I'm working with a producer and an engineer for the first time. Like,
really? Okay, tell us a bit about this. People are going to be curious.
So I think after Puzzle, I really felt the need to do the opposite, because Puzzle was so abstract. It's like, it's an art project. It's not a record, right? And so what typically happens is, from Deconstruction to Ghost, from City into Ocean Machine, from Alien into Synkestra, it's the opposite. It's like I get inspired to do whatever the last thing wasn't. And so I wanted to follow up something as abstract as Puzzle with something that was more streamlined and something that was more accessible.
Yeah,
I've always wanted to do that. And then Puzzle, man, is so fucked up that I was thinking, so what would be the polar opposite of this? And so I contacted a producer that I've known for 30 years, who we've never worked, we've just been friends, but his name's Garth Richardson. And he
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, that's his house. So he's done Rage Against the Machine or Melvins or if you look him up, he's done tons, right?
Yeah.
But his dad was a very famous producer in Canada, and then I got a hold of a mix engineer named Joe Barisi, who's done the last couple of Tool records, and he's doing a new Slipknot record and all this sort of thing, right? And so I said, let's, help me write an actual record. I've never made one of those. I've never made like an actual record, right? And so what's going to happen is there's Lightwork, there's Puzzle, there's Snuggles, which is the third record, and they're all going to come out at about the same time.
You're a lunatic. You're a complete lunatic.
But it felt like the right thing to do.
I'm glad you
felt like the right. I'm partial to it myself. Thank you. Yeah, but it's like I think it's just one of these things where I wanted to make something really beautiful with Lightwork. I wanted to make something that was. I wanted something when you turn it up on the radio or on the stereo sounded fucking awesome. I don't want to because I've mixed everything and it sounds good because I've made so many records that haven't sounded good. So I just keep learning. But I wanted to have one that's like, that sounds great. Like for real. That's like legit.
Like, damn, son.
Yeah. And what Garth has been great with, because I've tried to work with producers in the past, but they change what I do. But Garth has been much different for that. He just sort of watches what I do and then he'll just give me suggestions. He's like, he'll say little things that just make me think. Like I'll write a song and he'll come down and be like, what do you think of this? I'll be like, it's cool. That part's really cool. And then he'll leave the room and I'm like, oh, fuck. And then, you know what I mean?
The psychological artistry. The artistry. It's like architecture and artistry.
I love
artistry.
It. Yeah. But that's what he does. And it's been really great for me to be challenged like that. Because I've never put myself in that position. Like I've never.
That's killer.
Yeah, it's been great. And I really feel like this was the time for me to do this. And it's funny, Puzzle wouldn't have existed had I not started working with Garth prior to it. But when we first started working with it, he took my demos and he said, this is how I think it should go. And I was like, fuck you. No one fucking tells me what to do. And I went and made Puzzle with 60 musicians and I made a movie and nothing has got structure. And then when I finished it, I played it for Garth. He's like, "It's fucking awesome." He says, "You ready to make a record now?" I was like, "Yeah, all right."
Yeah. Have you gotten this filthy shit out of your system, you animal?
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
it's exactly what it was. And the whole thing with
and you've been doing this your whole life.
Yeah, but I think I'm old enough now to recognize it and move forward, right?
Yeah, and move with it.
That's what I'm doing.